Hello gals, today we are going to dive into a big conversation all about fueling female fitness. I have a lot to say on this topic, so I have a lot of notes. Obviously, I've been a sports nutritionist for like a decade now. I've been a personal trainer for even longer than that. And so there's a lot that I've seen in the industry and just a lot that I've worked with females when it comes to fueling the female body, fueling fitness, fueling physique goals, performance goals, and all of the things that females usually want to pursue when they're implementing nutrition and training protocols. And then on top of all of my notes, we did put it out to our community that we were going to record these episodes, and we got a lot of questions. I would say this is the most questions we ever got when we've put it out there to submit questions for an episode. So that is awesome. It just shows how much people want to know about this topic and how much there is to learn about it, which is unreal because this is my absolute bread and butter. So I am going to work through my notes today, and then I've kind of slotted in some of those questions where they kind of relate to that specific note or topic that I had. If you did submit a question, just know that we do have a lot of episodes planned, and there were some questions that I saw and I thought like, oh, that kind of suits that future episode a little bit more. So I've slotted it into those episodes, particularly questions about running, specifically like fueling running. Half marathons, full marathons, shorter distances. We had a lot of questions about that, and we're doing some more like niche specific episodes about that topic in the coming weeks. So I've moved those questions down to that one. So today's a big combo of community questions, Ruby notes, and it is, like I said, a massive combo. But where I want to start today is with the topic of cardio, because I think if we think about females pursuing health, fitness, and body composition goals, cardio can be a massive factor that people think they need to be doing on a big grind and really smashing themselves through. And the very first thing I want to say before we get into cardio is cardio can be fantastic for the physical health benefits. Obviously, literally for the cardiovascular benefits. I also know some people just enjoy it. So the mental health, emotional health side of it is unreal. And I know a lot of people also do things like group fitness or running with their mates. So the social health side of it is unreal as well. And then we obviously have our girls who are doing a high volume of cardio because they are pursuing things like running goals, sporting goals, triathlon, etc. So there is absolutely a place for cardio in women's fitness. But what I really want to get into here with this cardio topic is people who think that cardio is the big focus and is the thing that we have to do. And like I said before, the thing that we have to almost grind through and smash our body with as much cardio as we can. And I think that is a little bit of an old school mentality, but there's also still a lot of people doing it. I think if you've been in my world for a long time, you've probably moved away from that mentality of feeling like you have to do a crazy amount of cardio. But I think we forget that there's still a lot of people out there that are doing this. And I really just want to break down what we want to be thinking about here and the role that cardio can play and how it can benefit, but how it can also be a bit detrimental to some of the goals that women have. So I would say that I'm not so much anti-cardio as much as I'm pro women lifting weights and women doing resistance training. And I'm always very mindful of the fact that women are also very busy. Most of the women we work with either own businesses, study, have full-time jobs, have children, have partners, have maybe elderly parents, or all of the above. And you are literally juggling all of these things. And then you're also trying to juggle your nutrition, training, health, fitness goals. So if we think about the fact that we do have somewhat limited time, for some people they don't, and for some people they have incredibly limited time. But we know that most people have some sort of limit on how much training they can do. I really want to think about what is the most beneficial thing that we can focus on. If we've only got a certain amount of time we can spend in the gym or spend training, we really want to think about the best way to spend that time. So that's why I say I'm not so much anti-cardio, but because I am so pro-resistance training, and we're absolutely going to get into why that is today, I always want people to be mindful that if they do have that limited time, I personally think resistance training should be the big focus. And I think after you hear this conversation, you're going to understand why as well. So one of the first things we want to think about with cardio is that as women age, our bone mineral density and our muscle mass naturally decline. And I think this is one of those things that people don't care about too much when they're young, and then they do care about it a lot when they're older, and they almost find themselves in the position where they're feeling like, I wish I had known this when I was younger, or I wish I had cared about this when I was younger. And then they're trying to make up for that time that they spent not thinking about this. So if we think about bone mineral density and muscle mass declining, one of the sort of easiest things that we can think about here, and something that hopefully gets people to kind of prioritize this thought a little bit more, is if we think about an elderly female, like someone who we know that is quite old, and obviously I don't want to use the word old in a rude way, but if you think about an elderly female in your life who maybe hasn't prioritized resistance training for a long time, I think we can all picture an elderly female who is quite frail. And that's really what we want to think about here. And again, I think we have, 20-year-olds and maybe even 30-year-olds who think, well, that's not a big deal because I'm 20 or 30. I don't care about being old and frail. But what I really want people to remember is when you do start to care, you'll find yourself in a position where you're like, wow, I should have started this 20 years ago because now I actually care about it, but I've wasted 20 years of not being able to build it and I can't get those 20 years back. So what we're really looking at here is, like I said, if muscle mass and bone density are going to naturally decline as we age, there are things that we can do to combat that and to fight against that. So there are things that we can do to increase that bone mineral density and obviously to increase our muscle mass. And then we're almost going to find ourselves in a position where the body naturally wants to drop these things. We're proactively and consciously trying to build these things. And then therefore we can preserve them way more than we would if we weren't doing anything. If the body's going to go into a natural decline, we want to do what we can to work against that, to optimize that bone mineral density and our muscle mass for our everyday life right now, but then also for our life in the future, so we don't get into that position of being an elderly, frail female. And I'm actually really mindful of this being the very first thing that we talk about, because I think people would see the name of an episode like Fueling Female Fitness and think like, oh my God, I'm going to learn how to become like smoking hot female in the fitness industry. And then when we start getting into like muscle mass and bone mineral density, I think we're going to lose people straight away. But I'm in the position where I'm like, this shit is so important. If you don't care about it, you can leave. Right? And if you do care about it or you're still with me right now, that's awesome. And just know that we are going to talk about the role that these things can play in us becoming a smoking hot female in the fitness space. So stay with me. But if we bring this back to cardio, if somebody does have somewhat limited time, let's say we've got a female who can go to the gym 5 mornings a week for an hour. If we choose to spend that hour every morning doing cardio, we're on the step or we're on the bike or on the cross trainer, something like that, or we're even doing like a group fitness cardio class. By default, if we do have that limited time, we're not going to get any resistance training in. And if we just skip ahead for a little second here, resistance training is one of the key things that's going to help us build that muscle mass and that bone mineral density and combat the decline of those things. So we want to just look for a second and go, okay, well, if I only have limited time, and one thing is going to really, really help me become a strong, lean, fit female. And I'm going to talk about that lean because I think that's what's going to grab people in an episode like this especially. But if something is going to help us become a strong, lean female, more so than something else will, we want to think, okay, cool, well, how do I want to spend that time? Which one do I want to prioritize? And if we come back for a second to that actual cardio, something that we really commonly find going hand in hand with that excessive cardio training is often a low calorie diet or a restrictive diet. And if we look at this for a second, if a person is putting themselves through a high volume, high intensity, like real grind of this repetitive cardio training, and they've also paired that with a restrictive diet. And again, I think this is one of those things where if you've been in my world for a long time or you've learned a lot about this stuff, you're most likely and hopefully not doing this anymore. And we forget that so many women are. There are so many women right now who are thinking about getting up every day, going through that cardio grind, and then spending the day on a restrictive diet. And if we look at this really closely for a second before we move on to the next thing, if we do have a really restricted amount of energy and calories coming in, and then we're also asking the body to do this repetitive grind of cardio, the body can then even further break down more muscle than it naturally already is if things like carbohydrates, aka muscle glycogen, and we're going to get to that in a second, if there's low levels of that available in the body and there's low levels of fat available in the body has no choice. It's got to draw energy from somewhere, and the body can draw energy from muscle. So if we're in that position where we're not giving it much energy to perform this training, and then we're asking it to smash itself through this training all the time, it can find itself in a position where there's no choice but to start to draw from muscle. And then if we come back to the fact that we want females to have good muscle mass and good bone mineral density for strength and longevity and good quality of life, but also to look like a lean, fit individual who has something to show for all this training that she's doing, if we stop for a second and really look at someone who is smashing themselves through cardio and putting themselves on a restrictive diet, this is where we can find people in that position where it's almost like, for lack of a better term, skinny fat. And I'm doing air quotes, skinny fat, but this is where someone is just smashing themselves, but their body is quite depleted. There's not a lot of energy there. There's not a lot of muscle there. Therefore, the frame is quite frail. And we can see this through that kind of skinny fat look. And then if we think about someone who keeps this going for a long time, we do actually find ourselves in a position where it becomes really detrimental to health. And we can also feel like, wow, I've been grinding through this for an hour every morning for my whole life and then spending that whole day on a low calorie restrictive diet. And I don't feel like a strong, lean, good looking fitness individual. Because all of this is accumulating in a way that it's just declining the muscle mass and bone mineral density. We're quite depleted, we're quite underfueled. And if you think about the name of the episode, Fueling Female Fitness, we're really doing the opposite here. So I just want to reiterate that cardio can absolutely be a part of our training, but it should not be the focus of our training. And I am going to get to resistance training in a second and all of the benefits from that. But I just want to keep flowing with this convo for a second about that restricted energy coming in, because I do think these things often go hand in hand. When someone is really smashing themselves through a lot of cardio and more so feeling like they have to smash themselves through a lot of cardio, they can often be in that position as well where they feel like they have to put themselves on a low calorie diet or a really restrictive diet and just literally not eat much and not allow themselves to eat much. And so that can leave us in the position of poor physical health, like we've just spoken about, but it can also leave us in the position where we feel like our body doesn't look the way we want it to look, given the effort that we're putting in. So if you're someone who is in that mentality of thinking like, I just have to do a lot of cardio and I have to do a restrictive diet, we want to make sure we understand what I just spoke about there with that element of poor physical health. But there's also another huge element of poor physical health I want to talk about here. And if you're someone who feels like you're in this position, also just think about, does my body composition really reflect what I want it to reflect? Does it look the way I want it to look? Does it reflect the effort that I feel like I put into my nutrition and training? If it doesn't, stay with me and let me talk about the health consequences for one more second, and then we can talk about the aesthetic consequences and how to combat that as well. But if we look at that combination of high volume cardio training with a low energy intake coming in, this is the key thing that leads someone to what we call low energy availability. And low energy availability is exactly what it sounds like. There is a low amount of energy available for the body to function as well as we want it to and as it wants to. And really another way of saying this is just underfueling. And this is why I wanted to call this Fueling Female Fitness, because I want females to think about the fact that we need to fuel our fitness goals, we need to fuel our body, we need to fuel our performance, and fueling correctly is going to be the thing that optimizes our health and our body composition. So if we come back to someone who's pretty much doing the opposite of that, because the energy output, aka how much we're training, is quite high, and like I keep saying, it's that real grind through training, while a low amount of energy comes into the body, aka we're not eating much, aka we're underfueling, the body does fall into that position of low energy availability. And in simple terms, I mean, I could talk about low energy availability for 4 hours, but I'm going to try and keep it short and simple so we can understand it and we can really just look at like the key factors of this. But in simple terms, when the body is in this position, it has to essentially budget its energy. If it's in a position where it goes, you're not giving me much energy, you're then asking me to use a large amount of it towards training, aka this hour of cardio that I'm doing most days. I also have no choice but to put energy towards the function of things like the brain, the heart, all of the other organs in the body. If we then think about other things in the body that do require energy to function well, but don't need to be functioning well to actually survive for the day, we're starting to look at things here like hormone function, digestive function, the immune system, just to name a few. And I think those are the key ones that I like to talk about because I think people can understand how shit it is to get into a position where these things aren't functioning well. If you've experienced poor hormone function, poor digestive function, or a compromised immune system, I think you can understand and relate to how shitty that can feel and how shitty the consequences of that are. And again, if we bring this back to low energy availability, what's happening here is that those things do not need to function well for the human body to survive. Ideally, we want them to function well, and in a good, healthy body, they are functioning well, but we can survive without them functioning well. And that's the real key thing to think about here, because the body is designed to survive. The body wants to survive. Above all else, our body is going to fight for survival, right? And if we really think about this, if the body's in a position where it's not getting much energy, and we want to remember that energy is another word for calories, food contains calories, aka energy. So if we're limiting the amount that we take in, it means the body is not getting supplied with much energy. And a really important thing to remember here is the body cannot get energy any other way besides food. So if we have decided to give it a low amount, It's not getting it from anywhere else. That's it. It is in a position where it goes, there is a low amount of energy coming in, and there is nothing I can do about that. What I can do, if we come back to the body wanting to survive, what that body can do is go, okay, I'm going to learn to adjust as much as I can to this low energy state. If I've realized that I'm not getting much energy and you're also asking me to use a lot, I'm going to do everything I can to conserve as much as I can. I'm going to learn to adjust to this environment as much as I can, because remember, above all else, my key focus is survival. And I'm not going to survive if I keep expending too much energy when not enough is coming in. So this is where the body starts to conserve energy. And if we come back to what we said before, if we're asking the body to do the hour of cardio, it has no choice. It has to use some energy on that, right? If the body wants to survive, which we've just spoken about, it does, it has to use some energy towards organ function. Like I keep saying, the heart, the brain, the body cannot get through the day with those things not functioning. So it has to give it to that. And then it gets to a point where it goes, I'd love to give energy to things like hormone function, digestive function, immune system, etc., but I just can't. It's just not here. There's not enough here. So I have no choice. I have to limit how much energy I give those things. And if they don't get enough energy to function well, they're not going to function well. And really what we want to think about for a second here is the overall thing that's happening here is a downregulation in metabolism. I'll try to keep it simple, but we want to look at this for a second. But I think most people can understand this concept. Our basal metabolic rate, we might have heard about this before, but this is essentially how much energy / how much calories our body needs to simply survive the day before we even factor in movement. So this is exactly what we're looking at here with the body just operating. The body needs a certain amount of energy and calories simply just to operate before it even starts moving. If the body realizes, hey, we've got a real restriction in energy coming in here, I'm going to try and operate on as low amount as I possibly can. And people can think that this is a bad thing, but really this is the body trying to be as efficient as it can. It's trying to keep you alive. It's trying to conserve energy because it's realizing it's not going to have access to a large amount. So when that downregulation in metabolism happens, that really is the body going, let's limit the energy we're using on things that we don't have to be using it on. And that comes back to all the things I keep rattling off. If we have something like poor immune system or poor digestive function, yes, it's not ideal. Yes, it's very shitty to experience, but we can survive it. We can survive. If the body says, hey, you know what, today, just don't have enough energy for that digestive system to function as well as it wants to, we can still live through that day. It's a shitty quality of life, especially the longer it goes on, but the body doesn't care about that because the body is trying to survive. And if we piece together everything here that we've spoken about, if we're in a position where we're essentially like grinding through this cardio because we think that this is the solution to fat loss or weight loss or getting in shape, whatever our mentality is there, and then we also put ourselves on a restrictive diet for that same reason, if we've done this either for a long time, we've done it in a way that's too intense for the body in one go, or we've done it to a body that doesn't really need to do it, aka a body that is already small, doesn't have a large amount of fat to lose, doesn't have a large amount of weight to lose, then the body is going to start to recognize like, hey, you're putting me in quite an extreme state for any of those reasons, because A, you've asked me to do it for too long, B, you've asked me to do it too intensely, or C, you're asking me to do it when I'm not really in a position where this needs to be done. So for whatever reason, and for some people, it's a combo of all those things. Someone who is quite small already, doing this in a really intense way and has been for a long time, that's like the triple whammy of the body just going, holy hell, I have to fight for my life. And what can happen here is we end up in this position where people feel like, I want to be in shape, or I want to lose weight, I want to be lean, I want to look good, any of these things, I'm going to go and smash myself in the gym and limit my food intake as much as I can. If the body then goes through this process that we've just spoken about, it can start to suffer with those things like poor hormone function, digestive function, etc. And then therefore, we feel like we're not really getting the results from this restrictive diet and this high intensity training. And people's minds can then go to a place where it goes, I need to push this even harder. AKA, I'm going to train even harder or even longer, and I'm going to restrict my diet even further. And on the surface, we think like, my body's not responding to this thing, so I have to push harder. When really beneath the surface, the body's going, because you're pushing so hard, I'm not responding to this thing. And to really just reiterate this point, I'm going to read out the actual notes I had on this, and it's basically just going to summarize everything we've just spoken about. But what I had written in my notes is, some of the most common side effects of low energy availability are poor digestive function, poor hormone function, a compromised immune system, and an overall downregulation of metabolism. A combination of all of the above can be a vicious cycle. ... I'm smashing myself through hours of cardio and not fueling myself, leading to things like hormone and digestive function starting to suffer, leading to, if metabolism downregulates, my gut is feeling off and I feel like my hormones aren't functioning well, leading to someone thinking, I think I have intolerances and imbalances, so I have to restrict even harder or try even harder to combat these things, leading to, I'm going to limit my food even more and try to train a bit harder, leading to putting myself into a worse state of energy availability, leading to making these things worse, and the cycle continues. So if you've ever been in this position or you're in this position right now, I just want to say you are so not alone. There's a reason I'm recording this. There's a reason I've done this work for the last 10 years, because so often females have just been led to believe the harder I train / the more I exercise, and the harder I diet / the less I eat, the better shape I'm going to be in. Or it can even be as simple as like, the smaller I will be, the lighter I will be. And having that mentality of thinking smaller and lighter is better, or being in that position where you just think, I want to be in better shape, I want to be leaner, I want to look better, etc. There is nothing at all wrong with that. What starts to become wrong, in my opinion, is when we don't understand everything I just spoke about, and we do find ourselves in that vicious cycle of just pushing and pushing and pushing when we're not truly understanding what's happening below the surface, and realizing that if we were to understand this stuff, make some tweaks to our nutrition and training so we're training and eating in a smarter way, not just always in that harder way. We can do so in a way that supports things like metabolic function, hormone function, digestive system, immune system. And then we can be in a position where it's like, hey, these things are actually functioning well because I'm eating and training in a way that supports them doing that. Therefore, my body is working a lot better. Therefore, the effort that I'm putting into my nutrition and training is actually paying off because I've got this really well-functioning body that's responding well to the smart nutrition and training I have in place, instead of it feeling like it's just been smashed for months or maybe years or maybe decades. We have women who have been in this position for a really long time, and it's simply just that lack of understanding. And like I just said, you are so not alone, and I am not shaming anyone in this position because we don't know what we don't know. And that is exactly why I'm here, to help more females know this stuff and then start to work with their body instead of feeling like they're working against it all the time. So when it actually comes to working smarter and working with our body, enter weightlifting / resistance training. There are so many benefits of resistance training for our actual health, for our body to function well and make our nutrition and training more beneficial, and to get essentially like more bang for our buck with our nutrition and training approach, and the combo of those things leading to a better aesthetic, better body composition, and actually looking the way we want to look for the effort that we put into our nutrition and training. So the first thing I want to look at here really quickly is the point of lifting weights. The point of lifting weights is progressive overload and adaptation, or progressive overload leading to adaptation. And what this means is when we lift weights, we want to do so in the right way, with correct technique, with good form, with all of these things. And then we want to follow a structured program that is progressive, meaning if we go into the gym and we do something like a 30 kilo bench press, we want to do that really well. And then we want to eventually be able to do like a 35 kilo bench press, and then a 40 kilo, and then a 45 kilo. And we want to think about this with all of the resistance training that we're doing. And there's a fair few reasons that we want our training to be progressive like this. When the training is progressive, this is what warrants adaptation. Essentially, this is the body saying, if we use that example of benching 30 kilos, if that's like a sweet spot for the individual where we can do it, but it's quite challenging, it's working the muscles quite hard, the body essentially goes, hey, this is quite challenging for me. I need to adapt to be better at this. That is exactly what we want to get out of our time in the gym. If you are doing any form of training, which you should be, which should be resistance training, this is what we want to be happening. We want to have a structured program that implements progressive overload so it pushes the body to the point of adaptation. Because when the body hits that point of adaptation, aka doing something and thinking, this is challenging, I need to adapt to be able to do this better, it does adapt. And what happens there is the muscle breaks down during that training session, which can sound like a bad thing, but it's a good thing. This is what we call muscle protein breakdown. And then as it continues through that adaptation process after our training session, it goes through what we call muscle protein synthesis, which is that muscle rebuilding and repairing a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, so that over time, like I said before, those muscles can then eventually start bench pressing 35 kilos, and then 40, and then 45. And again, we want to apply this to any lifts that we're doing in the gym. And ideally, I'm not going to break this down too much today, but ideally we want to be doing this on most parts of the body or all parts of the body. We want to have some form of resistance training happening in the legs, legs and the upper body, and then we can start to break down individual muscles from there as well. We're not going to do that today, or we will literally be here all day, but we want to understand that concept of training. And if we come back to one of those initial points that I said, where as women age, our muscle mass naturally declines and our bone mineral density naturally declines, resistance training is one of the key factors, if not the most key factor. I'll probably say that about a few things today, but it is absolutely one of the key factors that's going to help fight against this. And we want to be doing this in a way where it's like, okay, well, if the body's naturally going to break these things down, what am I doing to build them up to work against that, so I don't find myself in a position where these things are just dropping and I'm never bringing them back up or balancing out that drop. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second, but I want to stop for a second and just talk about one of the body composition or the aesthetic benefits, because if anyone's still hanging around thinking, Rubes, tell me how I can just look smoking hot from all of this stuff, this is where it comes in. If we have a goal or a desire to work towards a toned physique has this muscle mass on it. If we think about someone who doesn't have much muscle mass, we start to come back to what we said before, where we can start to have that skinny fat look. And I just want to reiterate, guys, I'm not judging that. I'm not shaming that. I'm not judging people's body composition, but I think there's a huge disconnect where people feel like they have a goal to be more toned. The vision that you have in your mind from you going to the gym and putting effort into your diet is that I want to be in wicked shape. And usually for a lot of people, wicked shape is having that nice female shape and having that toned look. Again, come back to the fact that if we don't have resistance training happening and the body going through progressive overload and adaptation, we're not going to build any muscle mass. And if that term build muscle mass puts you off, stay with me. But if we don't build any muscle mass and then the body is in a state where that's naturally declining, again, we're going to be in this position where we're putting in effort to work towards a toned physique, but what we're doing is not what's required to build a toned physique. And like I said, if you get put off by that term build muscle mass, it is so important for females to understand that we do not naturally, quote, get bulky. If you see a female who is actually bulky and has like a big amount of muscle mass that you look at and think, I don't want that, just know that that female has probably worked for 10 plus years through very intentional cycles of calorie surpluses, aka overeating, and doing literally everything in her power to build as much muscle as possible. A female cannot naturally just, quote, get bulky without substances that we're not going to speak about today, or without just a crazy amount of very intentional focus over a huge amount of time. And if I quickly use myself as an example here, I've literally been lifting weights since I was 17 years old. I'm going to turn 35 this year. So this is starting to come up to like more than half of my life I've been lifting weights. I spend huge amounts of time out of calorie deficits, aka that position we spoke about before where we're underfueling. I hardly ever spend any time in a calorie deficit, and I sit in this like 60 kilo range. I've got muscle. Like if you've seen my quads, if you've seen my shoulders, like I have muscle, but I do not have big, bulky Arnie style muscle. I have, for the most part, a toned physique, and this comes down to fueling well and training in this progressive, adaptive way. So if you're someone who's hearing all this thinking like, I don't want to get bulky, just know that unless you're going to dedicate the next 10 years of your life to building muscle, you're not going to get, quote, bulky. And I feel like we're going to have a very small handful of females hearing that, thinking, well, damn it, because I really want to get jacked. So if that's you, just know that there are things that you can do to push that a bit further. But I'm going to speak, I think, to the masses right now who probably don't want to get bulky, but do want to look toned. We have to understand that to have that toned body composition, there has to be some visible muscle on that frame. And if muscle mass is naturally going to decline throughout a female's life, we have to be actively working towards gaining muscle to combat that, and doing all of this in a way that's well-fueled and strategic and smart. So again, coming back to the fact that if we're going to be putting effort into our nutrition and training, we feel like our results are reflective of that effort. And I absolutely love resistance training. So again, I feel like I could do a 4-hour riff about this. So I'm going to come back to my notes to make sure we cover all the things I wanted to cover on this. I feel like we've just covered like the aesthetic body composition side of lifting weights. And then the next note that I had is other benefits of lifting. Progressive overload equals training hard equals body working more equals burning more calories. So I really want to look at this for a second. If we think about females who want to be in better shape, and maybe that either means building a bit of muscle for some people, dropping a bit of body fat for others, or both for a lot of people. If we are implementing progressive overload, that's in simple terms asking the body to work harder or do something it hasn't done before. If we go back to that scenario of somebody doing a 35 kilo bench press and then eventually 40, 45, and if you're doing that with all of your lifts in the gym over time because you've got progressive overload in place, as you continue to go to the gym on a consistent basis, you're gradually asking your body to do more and more. If you're asking your body to do more and more, that's a body that's working harder. A body that's working harder is going to be burning calories. If you're a female who enjoys food, which I think most females do, and you want to fuel yourself and you want to build that toned physique, we can start to really piece all this together and start to fall into a sweet spot where it's like, okay, if I'm fueling myself well, which we're going to talk about in a second, and I'm also settling into this progressive resistance training program, I'm going to start to build a bit of muscle, but I'm also going to start to expend some more calories because I'm training effing hard in the gym as I'm lifting these weights. So my body's working hard. So my body's using energy to do that hard work. If I get good fueling in place to provide it that energy in a way that we can fuel the sessions, we can fuel the muscle growth, we can start to, like I said, get into a sweet spot where we're training hard and we're fueling well and our body is reflecting that. So just important to understand, I think again, people avoid lifting weights because they think they're going to get bulky, which hopefully that little riff we just did about getting toned instead of bulky is going to help people understand this. But then we also then think about those same people often choosing to do something like an hour on a cross trainer instead of lift weights because they want to, quote, burn calories and burn body fat. If we come back to what I just said, if you've got progressive training in place, aka that training is hard for you on a consistent basis because you're asking your body to do more, you're going to burn more calories in that session because you're training hard. And then you're also going to get the benefit of the muscle mass that accumulates from that session, starting to build a toned physique for you while you're actually fueling yourself. Can we see how I'm just starting to talk in a loop here? Because it can really create that sweet cycle and that sweet spot instead of that vicious cycle we spoke about before where we're underfueling, grinding through these cardio sessions, and then feeling like we've got to keep restricting and intensifying that process to get a result. In this scenario we're talking about here, we continue to lift heavy weights and we continue to fuel lifting those heavy weights, and we start to actually get the result that we want to show for that. And there's one other little thing that's just worth mentioning here quite quickly is what we call, you might have heard this referred to as the EPOC, you might have never heard of it, but what that stands for is excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. You don't have to remember that term, but really what we're looking at here is that window after a resistance training session where the body is still working hard from that session. And again, when we think about a body that's working hard, it's a body that's using energy, aka it's using calories. And so what's happening here, I'm going to keep this really simple because again, we don't really need to understand the details of the science of this, but if the body has just gone through a hard resistance training session, when we leave the gym and we walk out of that session, the body then goes through processes, and I've got a little list here, I'm just going to rattle them off. Once we finish that session, the body's going to be replenishing energy stores such as ATP and muscle glycogen. So that's just processes in the body, essentially just like restoring themselves, replenishing themselves from what they just used in that session. It's going to remove excess lactic acids that built up during that session. It's going to start repairing that damaged muscle tissue, which I might talk about a little bit more. And it's going to start rebalancing hormones that have had spikes during that session. People might think that sounds like a bad thing. That's part of the training process. Again, we're demanding hard things from the body. It's going to respond to that. Things are going to start to spike and work hard and just do their thing. And in that same sentence, I had lowering the body's core temperature. And I think most people can understand that. Obviously, we're a bit hot, we're a bit flustered after the session, the body starts to return back to normal there. So if we think about, again, we don't have to understand all of those things, but we want to just understand that when we walk out of the gym after a hard resistance training session, the body is then getting to work to be like, shit, that was hard. I've got to get back to normal to get through the day. And that requires work. All of those things we just rattled off require work. Anytime the body requires work, it requires energy. And again, this is just a cool thing to think about where when we understand all this, we can get to that point where we have that good resistance training in place and we're fueling all of these things. The body's using that fuel for everything we've just rattled off for the last 15 minutes. And then we're in this sweet spot where we're actually eating enough, training in a hard way, and getting the results to show for that. And the one little thing I said in there that I'd come back to, and I feel like I kind of mentioned this before, it's just worth like explaining this a little bit further. Our muscles go through that process of what we call muscle protein breakdown and muscle protein synthesis. If we want to gain muscle, which ideally, hopefully everyone listening does now, if we understand that gaining muscle is a thing that's going to help us look toned. If we want to gain muscle, we essentially want our muscle protein synthesis to be greater than our muscle protein breakdown. And that comes back to what we spoke about at the very start of this episode. Muscle protein breakdown is going to naturally increase as our lifetime goes on. So if that's happening, we want to make sure we get some muscle protein synthesis happening to offset that. And this is where muscle growth occurs, when that muscle protein synthesis happens. And this is where, when the muscle is broken down, it then goes through that rebuild and repair process. So when we go into the gym and we do something like a bench press or a hip thrust or a heavy row or lat pull down or RDL or anything that we're doing, we do what we call micro tears, or we could look at it as micro damage to those muscles, which again can sound like a bad thing, but this is the point of training, because this is what initiates the muscle protein synthesis. If we push that muscle in the session, and let's remember, pushing a muscle is why we want to have progressive overload in place. If we have progressive overload happening, the muscles are working harder over time, aka we're pushing the muscle, we push them to that point of breakdown. And then when we push them to that point of breakdown, we trigger that muscle protein synthesis, which is the repair and the rebuild of those muscles. And as we have that happening over time, aka we go into gym, we initiate that process, we come out of gym, there's some things we can do to optimize that muscle protein synthesis. I'll talk about that in a second. But we then go through that process for a few hours, a few days. That's a little bit different depending on how hard the session was, how conditioned the person was. There's a few factors there, but we don't really need to know the intricate details of that. What we want to know is that if we can get into a consistent routine of, let's say, lifting weights with our lower body on a Monday and going through that process, the lower body muscles then start to go through muscle protein synthesis across that Monday, maybe into the Tuesday. Meanwhile, on the Tuesday, we go into the gym, we lift weights on the upper body, and we start that process happening there. Maybe we have a rest day on Wednesday. Maybe we use Wednesday to do a little bit of cardio and get that cardiovascular fitness and aerobic fitness happening. Again, I'm not anti-cardio. We just want to understand the benefits of weightlifting and making sure we're doing that as well. If we then get to Thursday and we're like, yep, okay, cool. I did the hard leg session on Monday. I've allowed my leg muscles to go through the muscle protein synthesis and recover. They're feeling good. Now I'm going to go do it again. And we can do a leg session on the Thursday. We can start that whole process again. And then we might go back Friday, do the same thing with the upper body, get that happening on a consistent basis as well. And then if we step back and we look at a female who has a routine like this in place, we can divvy this up in a few different ways. You might do it with like a full body session. You might go into the gym on a Monday and do a few upper body and a few lower body exercises, get this process happening. Maybe you have your rest day Tuesday and you go back Wednesday or Thursday, you do a full body session again. There's so many ways we can structure the actual training. And for me personally, I do this for the individual depending on their schedule and their goals. Maybe we want to do a bit more lower than upper or vice versa. Maybe we can only get to the gym 3 days. Maybe we want to go there 5 days. So the way we would actually set up the specific program is going to be dependent on the individual. But regardless of how our program is actually set up, we want the point of the program or the structure of the program to be that we are consistently going through that process of implementing progressive overload, breaking down the muscle and triggering the muscle protein synthesis, aka the rebuild and repair. And again, like I was saying before, if we then get into a consistent routine of doing that, however we've personally set up our program, we step back and we look at someone that's been doing this for weeks or months or years on end. This is where we can start to offset that natural decline in muscle mass because we're actively working to hold on to it and to build it, which again is going to serve our health and our longevity, but it's also going to help us build that toned physique and have that lean aesthetic that so many females are working so hard for. And one other little thing that I feel like is worth mentioning before we get on to the next topic is a lot of people don't understand that if we come back to something I said before with our metabolism, or more so like our basal metabolic rate, and remember that is essentially the amount of calories / energy that our body needs to simply just maintain itself and operate through the day before we factor in any movement. This number is going to be different for every individual, and it's going to depend on things like our size, our gender, our age. There's a few factors that will make this up, but one factor that does contribute to this is how much muscle mass is on that body. How many kilos of muscle are sitting on that body? A really cool thing to know, a lot of people don't know this, is that a kilo of body fat burns about 4 to 5 calories a day. Meaning if we have 1 kilo of body fat sitting on our body, it's going to contribute literally about 4 calories a day to our overall energy expenditure when we're at rest. So again, if this person was to lay down and do absolutely nothing, their body's still going to use calories because it still needs energy to just survive and maintain itself. If that body has 1 kilo of body fat on it, that 1 kilo is going to contribute about 4 to 5 calories burnt for that day. However, a kilo of muscle contributes to about 13 calories a day being burnt per kilo. And so this might not sound like much difference, but if we think about people who have every other factor the same, but one person maybe has an excess 10 kilos of body fat and this other person has 10 kilos of muscle. The person with the muscle is going to have a higher metabolic rate, aka their body's going to use more energy every day to simply just be alive and function and maintain itself. And on its own, it might not sound like much. Again, let's use that example where someone has the 10 kilos of body fat, someone has the 10 kilos of muscle. Well, that body fat's going to burn, let's say, 40 calories throughout the day, and the muscle's going to burn 130. That's not that much difference, but at the same time, it still is 100 calories. And anyone who has monitored their calorie intake would know that anywhere you can get an extra 100 calories into your day is awesome. Why would you not? And the other cool thing to think about is, if we think about everything that we just covered, where if we have progressive hard resistance training in place, the body's going to work harder during that session, aka it's going to use more calories during that session. If we think about that post-exercise window where, again, if we've worked hard in the session, the body is going to work hard post-session to restore itself and replenish itself. And again, that hard work requires excess calories. So what I'm getting at here is, if we do have good quality structured progressive resistance training in place, there are multiple ways that this can add up in our favor to being able to eat more in a way that's going to actually fuel us and help us build that physique that we want. So again, think about someone who's just restricting their food and feeling like they have to eat sweet F all and do heaps of cardio to get in shape. Then we come over to someone who gets that good progressive resistance training in place. So they're starting to build muscle and actually have this toned physique. And at the same time, because they're building that muscle and they're doing this resistance training, they're getting all of these little extra benefits where they can eat a little bit more and actually set up enjoyable, good quality days of fueling themselves. And you better believe I'm about to get into that. But the benefits of the resistance training are starting to compound in multiple ways to work in our favor, just with our day-to-day nutrition and training, but also our health and our longevity, and also our aesthetic and our body composition goals. And like I said, guys, you better believe we're going to look at nutrition for fueling all of this. So that is where we are going right now. And I feel like one of the first cool things to look at here is protein, because if we think about everything we spoke about with muscle protein synthesis, obviously one of those keywords in there is protein. And this is where our daily protein consumption starts to come into play as well. I feel like we're in this weird time where some people have not cottoned onto the idea of protein. They haven't learned about it and they're not understanding the benefits of it. So this is where I think we come back to a lot of women who are smashing a lot of cardio, doing low calorie diets. And those low calorie diets might be like salads and nibbling on like little nuts and seeds and things like that. And those things can absolutely play a role in a good quality diet. But if we haven't understood protein, it can often mean that we have an overall really low energy intake coming in and an insufficient amount of protein as part of that. Then at the same time, I feel like the word protein has just gotten so much airtime in the last few years, and we have people that are obsessed with getting really high protein. And then I feel like there's a bit of a middle group where people are starting to understand it and learn about it. But often when we start to get conscious of how much protein we're consuming, we realize like, shit, I haven't been eating enough. And it can be quite hard when people initially learn about it and start trying to work towards getting sufficient protein. If you've ever found yourself in that position, or maybe you're in it right now, where you're like, oh, I've realized I should be eating X amount of protein, but I'm really struggling to hit it. That is probably one of the most common things I've seen, especially with beginners. So again, if you're in that position, you're not alone. But I think if we can explain the benefit of it and really start to break it down today, it can help people in any of those positions just realize why we want to consume it and roughly how much we want to consume. So protein is responsible for so many things in the body. I'm not going to break them all down today, or we will be here even longer. I feel like we are starting to rack up a very long episode here, but it's a goodie. But if we really sort of hone in on one of its specific benefits, and probably one of its key benefits, being the role that it plays in muscle maintenance and or muscle growth. Obviously, we've spent the last 45 minutes talking about why it's so important for females to want to increase their muscle mass and have a nice amount of muscle mass on the frame for the health benefits and for the aesthetic benefits. I'm going to keep reminding you guys that we can work towards both. The role that protein plays in this really comes in that muscle protein synthesis window. So after we've done our resistance training session and we've started to break down that muscle, and let's remember as well that muscle breakdown is also just happening all the time, even if we're not in the gym. But when we really hit that muscle protein breakdown in the gym, it starts to trigger that muscle protein synthesis. So that's really what we're looking at here, is hitting those muscles quite hard and really initiating that process so they can then come out and go through that muscle protein synthesis. When we do this, this is where, like I said before, the muscles are rebuilding and repairing. And a key thing that we need to build and repair muscle is dietary protein. So consuming enough protein and having enough protein available in the body so that when we hit this point and the muscle goes, I'm going through this muscle protein synthesis. A key thing I need here is dietary protein. Is there any available in the system for me to draw from? Yes, there is, if the person is consuming enough protein. So this is where it is such a key factor when it comes to optimizing our health and our body composition, because we know that resistance training and having muscle on the frame is going to really help optimize our health, and it's also going to help us get that look that we want. And if we think about resistance training being essentially like one half of the muscle building process, the muscle protein synthesis, which is optimized and fueled and required to have dietary protein to be able to do its thing, is the other half. So really, if we want to look at this in the most simple way possible, if we can have good quality progressive overload resistance training in place, and then we can have sufficient protein coming in throughout our days, we're going to really optimize our muscle growth and our muscle mass, and then reap the benefits of that, like we've just spoken about for the last hour. In my professional opinion, and it's a pretty common consensus in the industry, I think we want to aim for around 1.6 to 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. You might have seen people advise to get a little bit less. Sometimes we can advise to get less if the person's body weight is really high. So if you're someone who's going into a big weight loss journey, it'd be worth talking to a professional and finding out what you could make your specific protein requirement. Because if you're in a position, let's say honestly someone's in a position where they are 150 kilos. If we look at 2 times body weight, that's 300 grams of protein. That is insanely high. And I think any female listening who's ever worked towards a protein target would be like, I'm not hitting 300. That's very hard. And we don't need to hit such a high amount when we're in a position like that. I'm not going to get into that today, but I would really advise if you're in a position where you feel like you have a big weight loss goal, I would talk to a professional and just get an idea of what those numbers should look like for you personally. But today I really want to look at people who maybe have a bit of a small weight loss goal, or you're in a position where you're just trying to maintain and build your physique and build your shape. That window of 1.6 to 2 grams, I think, is perfect for people in this position. If you are in this position and you feel like you've been taught less, sometimes people can be taught less if they do have a goal of doing like a lot of endurance sport or something like that. Because, and I'm not going to get into this too much today, we might talk about this in our specific upcoming running episodes, but sometimes endurance athletes who are competing at a high level can find themselves in a position where they don't want muscle mass on the frame, because muscle mass is going to add to weight. And if we think about someone doing, a marathon or an ultra marathon or something like that, essentially they want as little weight on them as possible. Personally, even if females are doing things like that, I still want them to think about muscle mass, because we've got to think about life quality, longevity, overall health, not just like, oh, I'd rather do an endurance one with 2 kilos less on me. Yeah, but what about the quality of the rest of your life and as you age, right? So I'm getting a little bit off topic. I'll bring it back. But I just wanted to point out, if you're someone who is in the position where you've been given a lower target like that, it might be because A, you do endurance sport and someone set it up that way to really optimize your sporting performance, but not other things. Or it might be if you do have that large body weight, they've told you to aim for a little bit less, because if we go with 2 grams per kilo, it's going to be excessively high for you. So there is a few outlying factors. But I predominantly work with people who are either looking at maintaining muscle, building muscle, improving performance, improving strength to improve performance. So I always pretty much come back to this 1.6 to 2 grams. And I think that's a real sweet spot to fall into, because we want to make sure we get enough for all the reasons I've just spoken about. But we also don't want to make sure that it's excessively high, because the body's only going to use so much protein at a time. And if we think about females who are wanting to set up good quality days of eating overall, and I'm going to continue to explain what this looks like in a second. If we've hit a point where it's like, okay, well, I've given my body enough protein, in my opinion, it's quite a waste to give it more when we could use those calories towards other things that are going to support our health and our aesthetic as well. So in my opinion, I really do just like to prescribe in that 1.6 to 2 gram window for majority of people that I work with. And again, for everyone listening, I would honestly go to the effort of talking to a professional about your specific needs for that. But if we move on to the next nutrient that we want to look at, the next thing I want to look at here is dietary fat. And dietary fat is responsible for a few things in the body, but there's a couple that I just really want to hone in on if we're looking at this topic of fueling female fitness. The first one is it's essential for hormone support and good functioning hormones. So I don't think I need to sit here and inform females that this is something that we should want to be functioning well and something we should care about. So dietary fat's really going to play a key role with that. But the other thing I want to look at here is it's also a key factor in nutrient transport, and specifically a few nutrients that I want to hone in on right here. Again, I'm going to read the note that I wrote about this because I think this is really important. Fats are vital for absorbing vitamins A, D, and K, which the body cannot absorb efficiently without them. So this is a really important thing to remember. There are certain vitamins that the body cannot absorb unless it's got the dietary fat available to help support that process. I'm going to keep reading. Side note, I literally wrote side note, guys. Side note, vitamin D boosts calcium absorption, while vitamin K2 directs that calcium into bones and away from arteries, preventing buildup, making their combination more effective for bone mineralization and density than any single nutrient alone. This trio, aka calcium, vitamin D, vitamin K2, is crucial for preventing osteoporosis and supporting bone strength. So again, we touched on this at the very start of the episode, but females are going to have that natural decline in bone mineral density and bone strength as life goes on. So then if we think about the fact that there are 3 key nutrients that are going to help offset that and work against that, like I just spoke about with the muscle mass, and then we want to come back to the fact that 2 of those nutrients, aka the vitamin D and the vitamin K, need that dietary fat coming in alongside them to help the absorption process in the body. So I always try hard not to get into the weeds too much for people. I want people to just be able to understand kind of the key takeaways and not have to think about a million different vitamins and nutrients, etc., because it can just start to do your head in. I always want to be essentially the middleman between me really going through all of the finer details, and then how do we just convey this in a way that you can just pretty easily implement in your lives when you understand the basics and the foundations of it all. So if we think about what's going on there, essentially the body wants vitamin D, vitamin K2, and calcium to come in consistently to help optimize bone strength. And 2 out of those 3 things are going to be absorbed a lot more efficiently if we have sufficient dietary fat coming in as well. And then at the same time, we know that sufficient dietary fat's also going to help that hormone function. So it's a no-brainer that we would want to make sure we get enough of this to assist with all of those things. Again, I think it's absolutely worth talking to a professional about the specific amount that you might personally need. But personally, I like to work with about 0.6 grams per kilo of body weight. So if we look at someone who is 60 kilos, that calculates to be 36 grams. And this then becomes the minimum requirement that I tell people to get. So we can absolutely go above that. We can eat more than the 36 grams, but I like to give that minimum requirement so people can know hey, don't consume less than this, because we want to make sure we're getting at least that amount for all those reasons we just spoke about. And then from there, I think we'll talk about this in the next episode, but whether we consume a fair bit more than that minimum requirement or we consume just around that minimum requirement, I think usually comes back to how much overall calories we're taking in. Obviously, the more calories we take in, the higher our consumption of things like protein, dietary fat, and carbohydrates becomes, because those are the things that make up our calories. So if we're consuming more calories, we have to be consuming more of at least some of those things, if not all of them. So we'll probably touch on that again as this combo goes on, but I think regardless of the goal, regardless of the overall calorie intake coming in, we always want to get that minimum requirement for our body personally to make sure we have enough dietary fat coming in to support all of those other things we just spoke about. And if we look at what I just said there, the 3 things that are going to actually make up our overall calorie intake are protein, carbs, and fat. So these are our macronutrients that contain calories, and our overall calorie intake is going to be made up of a combination of these things. The last one that we haven't covered here is carbs. Carbs are the body's preferred energy source, and I'm going to come back to these because I've got a fair bit to say about these. But I have 2 more nutrients that I really want to talk about when we're looking at fueling female fitness, and the next one is iron. Personally, I would say I'm borderline obsessed with these 2 nutrients. First one's iron, the next one we're going to talk about is calcium, but I just have this obsession with understanding these, knowing we're getting sufficient amounts of these. I think when it comes to everyone, but especially females, these are so important. And I'm going to read my notes on these because otherwise I'll probably just end up rambling for even longer. So if you look at iron first, the note that I had is, iron is crucial for females, especially due to blood loss from menstruation and increased needs during pregnancy, as it's vital for oxygen transport, energy, and immune function, with low levels causing fatigue, poor concentration, pale skin, and reduced physical activity. This is so important to think about because iron deficiency is very common and very prevalent in females. And if we think about those effects of low iron levels being fatigue, poor concentration, reduced physical activity, I think anyone who's been diagnosed with iron deficiency or worked through iron deficiency will know that yes, those are absolutely consequences of it. And it's a very shitty feeling. So I think the more we understand and acknowledge this, obviously the more we can avoid those things. And I think anyone who's still listening at the hour mark of this episode would like to avoid feeling fatigued, having poor concentration, and having reduced physical ability. If I come back to my notes, women often need significantly more iron than men, and deficiency risk increases with heavy periods, pregnancy, and restrictive diets, impacting overall vitality, cognitive function, and well-being. And then a few key reasons that iron is essential for females. Obviously, menstruation. If we think about monthly blood loss, depletes iron stores, making women of reproductive age more vulnerable to deficiency than men. So if people don't know, the recommended daily intake of iron for women is more than double what it is for men. And we can see right here some of the reasons why. Because of things that the female body goes through that men's don't. Another key reason that I had for iron being essential for females is energy and oxygen. Iron forms hemoglobin, which carries oxygen from the lungs to the body, essential for energy production and preventing fatigue. So this starts to become even more important when we think about, again, the title of this episode, fueling female fitness. Obviously, if we're active females and we're needing that oxygen to get carried from the lungs to the body during times of high energetic demand, well, if you're a female who's training in the gym or you're running or you're playing sport or you're doing any of these things, you're putting your body in that position. If we don't have sufficient iron to fuel that, this is where we come back to that initial iron point of the fatigue and the reduced physical activity. It starts to really make sense. And just as a little bit of a side note, sometimes we can find that female runners need even more iron than an average female who's not doing a high volume of running. So I'm going to cover that a little bit more in our running episodes as well. But this can start to be a real game changer for someone who's really focusing on their energy and their performance with training, whether it's in the gym or for performance and sporting goals. If we have this iron deficiency leading to this reduced physical activity, low energy levels, etc., obviously we can start to see the last thing we want when these are our goals is low energy and reduced physical ability. And one of the last points I had there is cognitive and immune function. Adequate iron supports brain function, concentration, and a robust immune system, helping fight infections. And this almost starts to just tie back to what we spoke about at the very start of the episode, if people can even remember. If we're in a position where we have this higher energy output and then we find ourselves feeling like we're constantly getting sick, we spoke about that poor immune system. That can happen through the low energy availability. Obviously, if we think about somebody who has low energy availability, this is usually because they have a low amount of food or energy coming into the body. The more we reduce the food and energy coming into the body, the more likely we are to reduce the iron coming into the body as well. It's hard enough for people to get enough iron, let alone when they've got sweet F all calories to do so. So then we can really start to find ourselves in the position where lack of energy and lack of actual nutrients as part of that energy as well is just starting to really compound to being a female who does have goals to perform well and feel good. Yet we have so many things that are compounding behind the scenes to leave us in a position where we're really experiencing the opposite. And that last nutrient I said I was going to touch on is calcium. So the note I had here is calcium is crucial for bone health as it's the main mineral that provides bones with strength, structure, and density, acting as a vital mineral bank. Without enough dietary calcium, the body takes it from bones, weakening them and increasing the risk of osteoporosis. And on top of that, calcium also supports muscle contraction and nerve signals. So obviously, if we look at that bone health for a second, again, I think it's a no-brainer. I think most people learn this at a young age. Calcium is really good for bones. If we are females who have that natural decline in bone mineral density, we want to be doing what we can to combat that, again, so we don't get to the point of becoming frail. And we can think about that in terms of long-term, like I don't want to eventually be a frail old woman, but we can also think in terms of right now. If I do want to get after it in the gym, if I want to get after running goals, high rocks goals, triathlon goals, sporting goals, all of the above, it's an absolute no-brainer that we want strong muscles and strong bones. So all of these things start to really come together to form the recipe that's going to leave us in the optimal position to get after all of those things. And if we now start to look at all this in terms of practical nutrition advice, this is where, like I said before, I like to be that middleman where it's like, I'm going to go through all the data, all the numbers, all the fine tuning, all the research. And then you're going to be on the other side just being like, Rubes, I just want to eat and train in a way that's going to A, make me look good, B, make me feel good, and C, get after the goals that I want to get after, right? So we want to understand all of those things that I just spoke about, but we also want to know how can we actually implement them in just a practical way if we do have businesses, kids, elderly parents, partners, jobs, annoying bosses, all of the above to deal with on a daily basis. We don't want to have to sit there and nitpick vitamin D and vitamin K and iron and all of these things. How much energy do I have coming in? What's my muscle protein synthesis? There's so much going on here. So I always want people to understand this stuff because I don't like to just say to people, you should eat this much protein or you should prioritize calcium. If people can understand why they would want to do those things, I think we can get a lot more motivation towards actually doing them. If someone just told you to do something and you don't really know why, you're not going to be that driven to do it. If you can really look and go, wow, there's huge benefit to this for me for those reasons I just said, to look good and to feel good and to perform good. If that's important to you, you're going to reverse engineer that and go, okay, cool. Well, I understand the role that those things are going to play in regards to me achieving the things that are important to me. So I really like my girls to understand their overall energy needs, aka roughly how many calories do we need for the goal that you have and the activity that you're doing, etc. And I'm actually going to talk about that a little bit more in the next episode, how we can determine that and how we can set that up to support different phases and different goals. But then underneath that, I like people to understand how much protein they should be consuming for all the reasons we just said. I like them to understand how much dietary fat they need to get in every day for all the reasons we just said. And those two things are important because they're our macronutrients. And like I said, they're what's going to make up our calories. So anyone who's roughly monitoring their nutrition is going to, by default, be consuming decent amounts of dietary fat and protein. And that's where we want to be mindful of actually how much they should be for us individually. If we come over to that final macronutrient being carbohydrates, like I said before, carbs are the body's preferred energy source. And in my opinion, once someone is getting sufficient protein and we're falling within that window that we said before, and someone is getting sufficient dietary fat, we want to load up on carbs. If carbs are the body's preferred energy source and we are active females who are either getting after gym or sporting or performance goals or all of the above, we want that body to have energy. And I am going to continue to talk about these carbs in a second because we actually had a question that came in about carbs that I thought was really cool and a really juicy convo we could have there. So I'm going to get to that in 1 second. But another thing we want to understand with carbs is this is where our fiber starts to come into play. And this is where everything almost starts to overlap. So what I'm talking about here is dietary fiber is super important for good digestion, good bowel movements, keeping us regular. I think most people understand the basics of this. I don't think we need to get into this too much. And then if we start to look at where dietary fiber comes from, it comes from things like fruit, veggies, and whole grains. And this is where, like I said, everything starts to overlap because I like my girls to also understand roughly how much fiber they need relative to how much they're eating. So as our calorie intake increases, we usually increase fiber a little bit. And then if it drops, we can drop it a little bit. But overall, we want to have sufficient fiber coming in. Usually that's around the 25 gram mark and then up from there if people have a bit of a higher calorie target. And the main reason and benefit of this is, like I said, for good digestion and keeping us regular. But then it starts to overlap with the fact that where we get fiber is from, like I said, fruit, veggies, and whole grains. And those things start to contribute to our micronutrients, like our vitamins and minerals. So this is where I like to teach people about big key nutrients like protein, dietary fat, and fiber, and then food quality like fruit, veggies, and whole grains, instead of nitpicking every individual vitamin and mineral. If we literally told people to work towards every specific vitamin and mineral, you would do your head in. You would actually do your head in. So if we can tell people to focus on those big key macronutrients, because there's a big amount that we want to come in, and then when we come down to the micronutrients, if we can understand where those come from, aka the good quality foods that are going to help supply us with those, we can have more of a broad approach. Instead of thinking like, I need to eat X amount of vitamin C and vitamin A and folate and zinc. And like I said, that would do your head in. But if you can start to have that mentality of like, I'm going to hit the recommended daily intake of fruit, veggies, and whole grains, we start to overlap everything and we go, that's where I'm going to get a big chunk of my fiber. I'm also going to get a big chunk of my vitamins and minerals. I don't have to sit there and nitpick every individual one, but I can know that if I have a good amount of those things coming in and I have a bit of diversity through those, aka I mix up my veggies, I mix up my fruit, I can get a really good mix of those things coming in on a consistent basis. So I don't have to nitpick the numbers, but I can know that I have good nutrient quality coming in. So that's just my opinion and the approach that I like to take to it and get my clients to take to it, because I think there is a line between, obviously we want people to understand this stuff enough and look after themselves and have good quality of health. But like I said, I think we can then cross the line where if someone is so adamant on nitpicking so many numbers, it can actually start to become detrimental to health, because what kind of life are we going to have if we're literally aiming for like 30 different nutrition targets every single day? It's going to do someone's head in, and we don't need to do it, because when we look at micronutrients, they're exactly that. We want them in micro amounts. So usually if we can just have a good variety of fruit coming in, we are going to tick off things like vitamin C. We don't have to sit there and nitpick the number of that. We can just know like, hey, I eat berries and citrus fruit and a few different things like that pretty regularly. I know I'm getting some good vitamin C in. And we can have that same approach with all of those micronutrients, knowing that if we understand good food quality overall, those things are going to be pretty well covered. And the one thing I should say here is, obviously, if you know that you have a personal deficiency in something, that's absolutely worth prioritizing more and like specifically aiming to consume enough of that thing. I'm talking about right now people who are in overall good health and don't need to nitpick a certain number or focus on a certain number. But obviously you do want to find out if there are any individual requirements like that for you personally. But then if we start to look at the combination of all of this nutrition stuff really coming together, if a person understands how much protein they want to consume, how much dietary fat they want to make sure they're getting in, a rough fiber range that they should be consuming, being mindful of including some iron sources in their day, some good calcium foods in their day, and then looking at their overall food quality, making sure we've got the fruit, the veggies, the whole grains, all of that coming in. This can sound a little bit complex, but when I think people have spent just a bit of time thinking about this stuff, you can really start to understand that this is just kind of the typical, quote, healthy eating we all learnt back in primary school. And then most of us went through some crazy shit with the internet and magazines and diet culture and all of that suddenly started to rule all of these things out. And now we come back to the fact that like a, quote, good diet is usually, like I said, all the stuff we were eating when we were younger and we were taught to eat when we were younger. But if we really look at practically implementing that in our day, if we've got 4 meals throughout the day and we aim to get a good serve of protein in all of those, maybe we go for yogurt, maybe we go eggs, 1 or 2 serves of meat, maybe you use protein shakes, whatever you personally prefer. But if we can get a couple of good quality hits of protein throughout the day, tick, that's done. If we then work out what is it that we're going to actually have as the meal that contains that protein, we can then start to work out, okay, cool, am I factoring some veggies into that meal? AKA, am I having steak and veg for dinner? Am I having a chicken and salad sandwich for lunch? Am I having yogurt and fruit for breakfast? And so if we think about those things, it's like, okay, cool, now I've got my protein and I've also got some fruit and veg coming in alongside that, which like I just said, is going to start to contribute to our micronutrient intake as well. And that's also going to be a big key factor in our fiber coming in too. And then if we continue with the fiber thing, we might have a look throughout that day and go, okay, cool, where can I get some whole grains with this? So if I am thinking chicken and salad for lunch, am I putting it in a sandwich? Am I putting it in a whole grain wrap? If I'm thinking meat and veg for dinner, am I putting some brown rice with that, some wholemeal pasta? If I wanted to have eggs for my breakfast, am I putting that on whole grain toast? So can we see how, even though there is a fair few things for us to think about, it's actually just pretty normal food. But when we understand why there's certain things we would want to include and the rough amounts of those things, we can plan out good quality days in an amount that actually works for us and our goal. And we can do it from the mentality of what foods do I enjoy? How would I enjoy actually getting that fruit and veg in, actually getting those serves of protein in? And then if we continue with planning our day like that, we can then start to look at where is my dietary fat at? Because if we think about including things like meat, and maybe if you are having a chicken and salad sandwich for lunch, you've put some cheese on it. If you've gone with eggs for breakfast, they're going to contribute to our dietary fat. So that dietary fat is going to continue to accumulate as you plan your day. And then you can just check in on it and be like, have I got enough? Or do I need to actively add some things like avocado to my sandwich, or some nuts or seeds in that fruit and yogurt? Maybe I put some olive oil on my eggs on toast. Whatever it is for you personally, again, you can decide how you actually want to consume those foods, but that can be such a good way to plan out, like I said, just normal days of eating, but also understanding that it is ticking off so many of the things that females want to be ticking off if we are active and we're wanting to look after ourselves and optimize our body composition. The Eat Like Ruby podcast is not a substitute for professional medical or dietary advice. The advice given in this episode is general in nature and should not be used to treat any medical conditions, health conditions, illnesses, injuries, and/or any nutrition-related conditions, deficiencies, or similar. This podcast is not to be used as or in place of medical advice or dietary advice. Please consult your healthcare professional before implementing any of the advice, information, or protocols discussed in this episode.